I would like to call the January 11th, 2023 City Council regular meeting to order. Will everyone please stand and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Would the clerk please call the roll?
Mr. Carey?
Present.
Mr. Chilson?
Present.
Ms. Parker?
Present.
Ms. Hutchings?
Present.
Mr. Nelson?
Present.
You have a quorum, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. And may I have a motion to approve the agenda and the consent agenda?
So moved.
Thank you, Vice Mayor Parker. May I have a second? Thank you, Ms. Hutchings. Are there any changes to the agenda or consent agenda? Will the clerk please read the consent agenda?
December 28, 2023 Council Meeting Minutes. Ordinance for introduction. Ordinance 2023-001, amending Soldotna Municipal Code, Section 13.16.010, water and sewer usage charges, and adopting water and sewer rate schedules for fiscal years FY24 through FY28. Brought to us by the City Manager. Your public hearing is on January 25th. Ordinance 2023-002, increasing estimated revenues and appropriations by $100,000 in the general fund for additional snow removal services. Brought to you by the City Manager. Your hearing is on January 25th. Ordinance 2023-003, increasing estimated revenues and appropriations by $13,000 in the general fund for changes to the authorized personnel staffing table for fiscal year 2023, brought to you by the City Clerk. Hearings on January 25th. Resolution 2023-001, approving amendments to the Finance Department and Clerk's Office retention schedules and amending the Public Works schedule to create a Utility Department retention schedule, brought to you by the City Clerk. Resolution 2023-002, approving amendments to the Soldotna Community Memorial Park Administrative Policy and Fee Schedule, brought to you by the City Clerk. That is your consent agenda.
Thank you. Are there any public comments on any of the items just read by the clerk? For those participating through Zoom, please raise your hand if you would like to comment. App users by pressing the raise your hand button, and phone participants by dialing *9 on your telephone. Is there anyone here in the audience wishing to speak on any of the items just read by the clerk? Seeing none, I'll look at hands raised on Zoom, and there are no hands raised on Zoom. Having no one wishing-
Mayor Whitney,
I'm sorry?
clarification, Resolution 2023-005 on our agenda shows it's on the consent, and that was not read by the clerk. Is it still on the consent, or has it been removed?
Not on the consent agenda on mine. That's that the authorizing the city to enter into.
Yes.
He's got a different agenda.
Where would you like it? Will you read it as consent?
Go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. So our intention was to have presented that as being on the consent agenda, and I believe it was advertised that way.
Thank you, Councilmember Parker. Resolution 2023-005, authorizing the city to enter into the Alaska Water and Wastewater Agency Response Network, ACWARN, Mutual Aid Agreement. It's brought to you by the City Manager.
So we'll go back to this again. Are there any public comments on any of the items just read by the clerk? For those participating through Zoom, please raise your hand if you would like to comment. App users by pressing the raise your hand button, and phone participants by dialing *9 on your telephone. Anyone here in the audience wishing to speak on any of those items on the consent agenda? Seeing no one, I'm looking at Zoom and I see no hands raised. So, are there any council objections to approving the agenda and consent agenda? Seeing and hearing none, the consent agenda and consent agenda are approved by unanimous consent. Next item on the agenda is the seating of newly appointed members, reviewing of applicants for appointment to City Council seat F. There are 4 qualified applicants for City Council seat F. Applicants were listed on the agenda in order that the applications were received. Are there any objections to beginning the interview process? Seeing none, we will start out with the applicants. The very first one is Julie Kincaid. And you will have 3 to 5 minutes to make a statement, and then there will be possibly some questions from the council.
Good evening, and thank you for this opportunity. I don't know most of you, but I am Julie Kincaid, and I have lived in Soldotna since 2008. I have 6 children from ages 12 to 25, so half of them are gone from home. So we're kind of in that midway range between empty nester and, parents of young children. I grew up in Alaska. I was born and raised in Anchorage, and then left for a while to go to school in Seattle. I got a degree in economics from the University of Washington. And we also lived in Michigan for several years before returning to Alaska. I am excited to run because I really care about our community, and I think it's important to have people on our city government who represent all different types of people in the community. I often have a chance to talk to people who are thinking about moving here. A couple times a month, even sometimes, people will call and say, "Oh, I'm thinking about moving here." Often it's through the hospital where my husband works, and they'll get kind of shuttled to me. And they often ask about amenities from our city and what's it like living here. As I talk about Soldotna, they often ask questions about things like sports for their kids or schools or, what's it like with the crime in the community, things like this. So I've thought a lot about what it's like living here and the projects that I'm excited about that are coming up that will make Soldotna an even better place to live. I'm super excited about the field house, that there's been so much work and effort put into that over so many years. I'm excited to see that go forward and see what that does for our community. I'm also excited about the Riverfront Development Project. When I first moved here, I thought, oh, wouldn't it be great to have like a walkable, kind of downtown area for business? Because I've seen so many cities that have that. And I think that is a huge step forward for our community. And if I was on the city council, that's something I'd be very excited about seeing through. And I just am, excited to enter city politics and to be a voice of reason for the city. And that's it. Do you guys have any questions for me?
Any questions from the council? Vice Mayor Parker.
Thank you, Mayor Whitney. And thank you, Mrs. Kincaid, for coming forth and putting your name forward.
Mm-hmm.
My question is, what do you see as the city of Soldotna's attributes? And to follow up, what do you see as the city of Soldotna's challenges?
That's great. I think some of the attributes of Soldotna that I always talk about is it feels very safe here, and almost like a bubble kind of safe. Sometimes when we travel and we come back, I feel like almost like I'm going back in time, but not in a bad way, like a very comforting way, like you're going home to into a little bubble of security, and that's what it feels like to me. The people here are welcoming and kind, and I really appreciate that about this city. It's been a great place to raise our children. As far as the challenges of Soldotna, it is kind of far from other, metropolitan areas, and so sometimes that can be difficult to attract people here. People are concerned about that. So the more, amenities that we have here, the easier it is to attract people here. Yeah.
Mr. Carey.
Ma'am, is your intention exclusively for just an interim position?
Great question. I'm really excited about this opportunity to apply for the interim position because it's a way to get my foot in the door. And but I would love to be on this long term.
Thank you.
Any other questions from the council? Mr. Cholson.
Thank you for coming out tonight and putting in your name for this process. My question would be, have you had a chance to familiarize yourself with any of the city's budget documents or financial reports? And following that, do you have any priorities or changes that you would like to see made with the finances for the city?
I haven't looked at the budget or documents yet, so I don't have any opinion on that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, though. Great question.
Any other questions from the council? Seeing none, thank you very much, Ms. Kincaid.
Thank you.
The next applicant is Mr. Larry Opperman. You'll have 3 to 5 minutes to make a statement.
All right. Mayor Whitney and members of the council and everyone in the chambers here, thanks for the opportunity to come and vie for the vacant seat on the city council. When I initially discovered that if Justin Ruffridge was going to, if he won representative, which he did, that a seat would become vacant, I looked at the possibility of filling that seat. When I looked at the application process, I noticed that there was a item called a letter of intent. Well, I've written all sorts of documents, work plans, tech reports, all sorts of stuff, but I'd never written a letter of intent before. So I did a little research, and I looked at different letters of intent, and I saw one that gave the intent, and then it gave a brief synopsis of work experience, like a resume. So that's what I did. So unless you've got questions about my work experience, I will go there to suffice to say that my work in engineering on Elmendorf is pretty much exactly what the city council does and the Department of Public Works. We took care of a huge city, and I was one of the senior leaders. We took care of roads, snow removal. The fire department was under the purview of civil engineering, miles of utilities, water, wastewater, stormwater, and we took care of that. And I enjoyed being a team member that did that, along with the identification and budgeting of those needs and services. So I'm going to not really go into my work history anymore unless one of you have a question about that. But after I saw that the seat was open, I asked myself, why would I want to be on the city council? And part of it is because I really enjoyed the work I did with engineering, and I decided I wanted to be another team member of an organization that helps take care of a city. And when you look at Soldotna, it's a wonderful place. Soldotna is absolutely a great place. My wife and I have been in Alaska for 32 years, approaching 32 years, 12 years approaching on the peninsula, and approaching 7 years in Soldotna. And the great thing about Soldotna is it's a home rule city. And I know you folks know, and maybe for some folks that don't know, home rule city allows the city government to basically set the rules as long as everything is in accordance with the Alaska and U.S. constitutions. So what that means to me is regardless of an individual, a business, a special user group, everyone deserves fair and equitable treatment under the government. Now, sometimes some of those folks that want something done, it can't be done because it's not allowed in the Constitution. So that to me is one of the best attributes that we can have on a home rule city government is fair and equitable to everyone. And that to me is very important to do that. I love Soldotna. I do think we do have some challenges down here. We're a hub, and I believe there's a lot we can do. And I'm going to state a kind of adjust the wording of it a little bit of an old Greek proverb that says you can tell a society by the older folks in that society who plant a tree, knowing that they'll never sit in the shade of that tree. And that's how I view myself. I'm not a young man, I'm experienced, and I would love to do something for the city of Soldotna where the folks that live here 20, 30, 40 years from now, which I won't be around then, that is advantageous to them and keeps Soldotna is a great city already, but something that helps keep it great.
Thank you.
All right, thanks.
Any questions from the council? Mr. Chilson?
Just to keep it fair, I'll ask the same question to everyone. Have you had a chance to review the city budget or any of our annual financial reports, such as the CAFR or PAFR? And then following on that, would you have any recommended changes or priorities you'd like to see with the city finances?
You know, I actually have looked at a few of those documents, but there's so much information out there, it's hard to remember everything. I've read the city's master plan several times.
Okay.
My group we did the master plan for Elmendorf, and I'm well versed with those. But yeah, it's hard to say. All I can say is, when you look at the job I did, I was chief of asset management on base, and there's two different things when you're dealing with asset management when it comes to budgeting, and that is you manage assets. The folks in public works, they maintain the utilities, the infrastructure of the city, and then there's managing asset, and then there's asset management, which relates to the funding and the long-term process to make sure those assets are in a place that lasts your city as long as they can at the best financial cost for those items that we take care of.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Vice Mayor Parker?
Thank you, Mayor Whitney. And Mr. Oberman, thank you for coming forth and putting your name forth. We appreciate it very much. As Councilmember Chilson, what do you see as the best attributes for the city that the city of Soldotna has, and what do you see as the challenges facing us?
Well, I think one of our main attributes is where we are. We're on the Kenai River. We are a hub. We're ripe for development. We are, as long as we can get things moving, and I think we're here to build. I think we're here to build the city. As far as some of the challenges, some of those challenges are space. We have housing problems, housing shortages, and that's some of the best things we can do is somehow get more space within this city to allow development, allow lesser expensive housing for residents, and make it more attractive for folks to want to be in Soldotna.
Thank you, sir.
Mr. Carey?
Sir, is your interest on the council exclusively for the interim position?
No, it isn't. I figured that this would actually be a prime example of sitting on the council and deciding, if I did a very good job for you, whether I would want to run when the seat actually came up for election. And I would be more than happy to do that and make this more of a long-term engagement if that's what the city, the voters of Soldotna would want.
Thank you, sir.
Any other questions from the council? Seeing none, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Opperman. Next applicant is Danica Nash.
Hi, it's Donica, like Monica, with a D. I have a sister named Alyssa, like Melissa, with a D. So I'm Donica Nash. I was born and raised here. I am currently a teacher at River City Academy right now. My husband's the principal over there. We came and moved back in 2014 to take over our Setnet fishing site, which we have on the Cook Inlet over in Kasilof. And during that time, we were trying to find some work to supplement that summertime income. I worked for the public library, which will go down, and I already had planned on saying this before I saw Rachel here. It will go down as one of my favorite jobs I've held. When I worked for the public library, that's when I finally had this appreciation for the town I grew up in. When you grow up in a town, I don't know, maybe Jordan feels this way too. I felt trapped by my town, a little bit like you're just a victim to the town you're growing up in. You just want to escape, get out to the big world. And I went out to the big world, and now I'm back. And then I worked at the public library, and I saw all the intricacies, everything that goes on into running this town that I grew up in. And I had this deeper appreciation for all the things that are going on and the things that were offered that I actually didn't know existed before. We lived outside of city limits, so I was unaware of a lot of the things. I went on to get I went out of state to get my bachelor's in classical studies and ancient languages, with the intention of teaching Greek and Latin to the few who want to learn that these days. And I ended up going on to getting my master's in teaching English. So that's what I am doing right now. Oddly enough, when Mr. Opperman said he didn't know what a letter of intent was, I actually had just done that for my PhD. And I'm sitting here with a little bit of anxiety realizing I think I might have gotten my PhD letter of intent for this position. So I'm hoping that if you see that I applied for rhetorics and communications, I'm like really hoping I didn't make that mistake. I love it, but I was aware of what I wrote for my letter of intent here. So yeah, I love this city. I have 4 kids. We've been able to take part in all of the things that the city's offered, all of the events that have been around. That's something that really satisfied a hole that I had moving back here from a small town that had all of those wonderful events where we all were together. The whole city showed up, and I'm starting to get that feeling again now that I'm a mom and I can take my kids. I know about these events and we're doing it. So I've really appreciated seeing the community come together for all of these things, and I would love to be a part of helping make decisions for the trajectory that Soledad has been taking. And I am just really passionate about our city now. This is my home. I didn't want to admit it when I was 16, but it is now, and now it's my kids' home. So I'm really proud to be a part of Solana.
Thank you. Any questions from the council? Mr. Chilson.
I'll continue. As I asked the other candidates, have you had a chance to review the city budget or any of our financial reports, such as the PAFR or CAFR? And then following on that, do you have any priorities or changes you'd like to see done with the city's finances?
I'm not familiar with those terms, although I thought I was reviewing them. I thought it'd be a fun task to take on with some of my high school students. It wasn't. I was hoping to become more familiar with the job because I'm not sure I couldn't get a grasp for what those numbers would mean in regards to all the other areas. So I have no ideas for making changes at this point.
Okay, thank you.
Vice Mayor Parker.
Thank you, Mayor Whitney. And Ms. Nash, thank you for putting forth your name for consideration for Soledad City Council. And as I asked the other 2 candidates, what do you see as the city of Soledad's best attributes, and what do you see as our challenges today and in the future?
Yeah, I think obviously we have this river access and this really amazing access to fisheries. I think that is a huge attribute we have. I also think it's a big challenge trying to figure out how to manage that in a way that's respectful of the people who own homes here and land and businesses here, and in a way that can help propel us forward. I'm really excited about the riverfront opportunity. I understand that there's going to be a lot of challenges with that, but we are a fishing town. That is something that's very unique and brings a lot of people here. And as I am now an adult raising kids, I'm starting to see that there are a lot of opportunities to really grow as a community together. And I know that maybe a lot of people don't feel that way, but I have been really living into noticing all the opportunities we have to come together to help make Soledad better. And I think that we're on the right track towards that way.
Mr. Carey.
Ma'am, I really like the authentic opportunity for rhetoric dialogue and conversation. So again, I like the letter. Is it your intent exclusively to focus on the interim position only?
No, it actually came as a surprise when I realized it was going to be such a short position. So no, it was not my intent, but like everybody else said, I can see the benefit in it being an interim position, but that's not what that's not my ultimate goal.
Thank you.
Any other questions from the council? Seeing none, thank you, Ms. Nash, for your application. The next candidate is Shara Wackler. And you'll have 3 to 5 minutes to give a statement.
Thank you. So to try to collect my thoughts, I am going to be reading them. Otherwise, I might talk for like 6 hours. Why am I seeking to fill recently open CF? The truth is, I've annoyed my husband to no end listening to council meetings at the city, school district, and borough with increasing frequency for the last 3 years. Not everyone is interested in the inner workings of our small town, but I am. While I've only resided inside the city limits of Soldotna since 2019, I've had a Soldotna address since 2007 on Arc Loop, K Beach, and most recently just down the road from here. I've lived and worked in the surrounding area for most of my life, growing up in Nikiski, graduating from KCHS, and the business I started in Soldotna celebrated 16 years in operation last year. I've been a substitute teacher with the Kenai Peninsula School District, had my twins at Central Peninsula Hospital, taught through community schools adult education program, as well as enjoyed teaching art classes around town. As you all may remember, I recently jumped into the world of fundraising. You guys helped me with that effort. The true heart of the network is the community. The more I get involved, the more I want to keep going. There are so many aspects of what the municipal government does that go on unnoticed by the community at large. Not everyone realizes that the plants don't get watered on their own, and the projects that enrich their lives, like sewage treatment upgrades, sidewalk plowing, music in the park, would not be possible without the many hours doing that boring stuff, like appropriating funds and seconding motions. Soldotna didn't start out as the backbone of the Kenai. Over the course of the last 30 years, it has quickly become the hub of commerce. Everyone on the Kenai Peninsula comes to Soldotna to work, shop, and play. There's a great responsibility placed on the Soldotna City Council members to give rules and help Soldotna not only provide adequate services, but to enrich the lives of the residents of the whole Kenai Peninsula. I have enjoyed getting more involved in the community over the last couple of years and hope my voice on the council will be helpful in continuing the progress that has been started by previous and current council members to serve the community. I'll have a lot for you all to teach me about how it all works, but I'm willing to learn and would be grateful for the opportunity to serve the citizens of our city.
Thank you. Any questions from the council? Mr. Cholson?
Let me guess.
Seeing a pattern here. So same
Do you want to
question
ask a
as everyone
different
else. Have you had a chance to review the city budget or seen any of our financial reports, such as the PAFR, CAFR, and to extend on what those were, those are the popular annual financial report and the comprehensive annual financial report. And then building on those, do you have any priorities or changes that you would like to see handled with the city finances?
I did not dig into the financial reports. I know the city is in a pretty good position, but I have not dug into those. I figured I'd wait until I saw the need to come up with items that I wanted to bring forth. I think the major thing that I would want to do as far as changes is listen to the little things that the community has issues with, take into account the tiny issues and just be really responsive to community needs, and be ready and available. Did that answer the question? No, I have not looked at the budgets.
Okay, thank you.
Vice Mayor Parker?
Thank you, Mayor Whitney, and thank you, Ms. Wackler, for coming to the city council again. So you know my question. What do you see as the attributes that the city of Soldotna has to offer, and what do you see as our challenges both today and in the future?
I think first and foremost, what I've seen with living in the city of Soldotna is the biggest attribute is the community, is the population, the citizens. As more people have mentioned, it's a really tight community that I've seen. I mean, just lately, the amount of people ready and willing to help out their neighbors is just, it's amazing to watch and to see it in real life happen. And so that's the biggest thing that I think is the attribute. Difficulties, I think, we've definitely talked about annexation and expanding the boundaries of the city, because we do service a much larger area than what the city boundaries actually are. So figuring out how to do the practical application of servicing, making those services happen without annexation, I think is probably going to be one of the most difficult aspects to kind of reconcile that we are doing projects that serve everyone outside. But with tax revenue coming in, I think that that kind of can placate that idea that we are bringing in revenue from all the people around the community for those things. So you can do things like the Field House project and expanding the waterfront area and things like that that service the whole community while being able to keep us within budget.
Thank you.
Mr. Carey?
Ma'am, would you anticipate that your husband be willing to continue to listen to you discuss things in Soldotna for more than the interim position?
Would my husband be willing to what?
Continue to listen to you.
He's really good at tuning it out. So to answer your question more seriously, I think as everybody saw this as an opportunity to kind of get their toe in the door without having to campaign and do something like that, I think it's a great opportunity to see if the job would be a good fit for me, either with my family at home or with the community at large, thinking I do a good job. Kind of just the interim position is a way to get your foot in the door. Am I opposed to continuing it? I'm not opposed to it, but I have not made that decision yet.
Thank you, excellent.
Any other questions from the council? Seeing none, thank you, Ms. Wackler. I would like to thank all four of the candidates and applicants for presenting an application for this position. You all presented yourself very well, and we appreciate your concern and your interest in becoming a member of the City Council. So next, we will move on to having no other applicants. Are there any objections to beginning the voting process? Hearing none, would the clerk please pass out the ballots? A simple majority of the remaining council is required for appointment. I'm sorry? Okay.
Just vote one. There's extra copies just in case.
Not yet.
After voting is complete, the clerk will tally the votes and read the results into the record.
Mr. Mayor, I have 2 votes for Julie Kincaid and 3 votes for Shara Wackler.
Okay, well, may I have a motion to appoint Shara Wackler to Soldotna City Council seat F?
Mr. Mayor, I would move that the City of Soldotna appoint Shara Wackler to Soldotna City Council seat F.
I'll second that.
Thank you, Vice Mayor Parker, and thank you, Mr. Chilson. And call for the vote.
Mr. Carey?
Yes.
Mr. Chilson?
Yes.
Ms. Parker?
Yes.
Ms. Hutchings?
Yes.
Mr. Nelson?
Yes.
You have 5 yes votes.
The motion passed on a 5-0 vote. The city clerk will now give the newly appointed council member her oath of office.
I, Shara Wackler, do solemnly swear that I will support the Constitution of the United States, the laws of the state of Alaska, and the laws and ordinances of the city of Soldotna, and and that I will faithfully and impartially
perform and discharge my duties
perform and discharge my duties
as a council member
as a council member
to the best of my ability.
to the best of my ability. Thank you.
May I present you to your chair? I know.
Congratulations, Ms. Wackler. Thank you. Welcome aboard. And clear your calendar. There's a lot of things going on over the next 30 days or so. You will be very busy. Okay, moving on to the next item on the agenda is item number 5, public comments and presentations. Items other than those appearing on the agenda, 3 minutes per speaker, 20 minutes aggregate. Are there any members of the public who would like to speak on any item not appearing on the agenda? Seeing no one here in the audience, we'll go to Zoom, and I see no, excuse me. For those participating through Zoom, please raise your hand if you would like to comment. App users by pressing the raise your hand button, and phone participants by dialing *9 on your telephone. No one here in the audience wishing to speak, and I see no hands raised on Zoom. So moving on to the next item agenda is assembly and legislative reports. Are there any representatives from the borough or the state in attendance who would like to speak? For those participating through Zoom, please raise your hand if you would like to comment. App users by pressing the raise your hand button, and phone participants by dialing *9 on your telephone. And I see no one here in the audience, and I see Mr. Cox is on Zoom, and he has his hand raised. You're on, Mr. Cox.
Are you there?
We're here.
Okay, I was listening out of town tonight, so I'm not there in person. I would have liked to have been, but this is an important thing for Sodatna, so I do want to congratulate Chair Wackler on your appointment. And with that, the only other thing I will add is to remind folks that we do have an election on February 14th, and everybody needs to get out and vote. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions for Mr. Cox? Vice Mayor Parker.
Assemblymember Cox, can you remind us the deadline to register to vote if we are not registered?
Actually, I'm not very positive on what that date is. I do know that for absentee voting, it started on the 1st. I am not sure of the date to register to vote, but I definitely can find that out.
Maybe our city clerk could fill us in?
I hope so.
30 days prior to any election is your deadline, so January 14th.
So, Sunday.
So coming up very quickly. But I will note, if it's okay, is I will note that absentee voting has opened. You can go and to register to absentee vote, and you can go to the borough's website. It is on the front page there as a link. And everyone should be receiving a postcard as a reminder that we do have this election coming up. And if you're not going to be here, please absentee vote. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Cox. Moving on to the next agenda item is public hearings, testimony limited to 3 minutes per speaker. Ordinance 2022-035, amending Sodatna Municipal Code, Title 17, to establish standards for the use of accessory dwelling units as short-term rentals, introduced by Councilmember Chilson. May I have a motion to enact?
I would move to enact ordinance 2022-035.
May I have a second? Thank you, Ms. Hutchings. Report from the administration.
Mr. Mayor, as the non-sponsor of this ordinance, I would defer to the sponsor to give the report.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. As you all know, Ordinance 2022-029 recently passed our council some months back, and this pertained to a code rewrite addressing short-term rentals, not necessarily short-term rentals, I'm sorry, accessory dwellings or ADUs inside city limits. One of the goals of that code rewrite, posing myself tonight. One of the goals of that code rewrite was to diversify and expand housing options within our city. So prior to that code rewrite, we did permit ADUs. However, there was no allowance for them to be used for rental purposes within the city. They kind of filled this odd little niche where they could be used for personal uses or having friends or family come in and stay on your accessory dwelling units on your property, but you couldn't rent them out. Following the code rewrite that we put through, they are now able to be rented, and they can be put for rent as short-term rentals or long-term rentals. There's really no delineation there. And the reason I brought this forward tonight is because as the language is now structured, again, we have no delineation between ADUs used for long-term rentals and those for short-term. And currently there is a very strong imbalance, not only in our city, but just throughout the entire state between long-term and short-term rentals. For example, this evening, right before our meeting, I was able to get on Zillow, and if you were to search for rental units that are available just here in the Soldotna area, there's one apartment listed for rent right now inside city limits that I could see. If you open your Airbnb app and start looking for short-term rentals that are available within our area, it looks like a chessboard. They're all over. I believe that it is important that if we are going to be increasing the number of rental housing units in our city, that we do so in a way that supports those that are in most need of stable long-term housing. With no restrictions on ADU STR use, I believe there's a very real risk that the majority of these new units that are going to be landing in our real estate market will land as STRs, and we will have done nothing meaningful to help address local housing needs. Traditional rental units are being removed from the market and converted for short-term rental use is a very common trend these days. It's a problem, again, that is occurring not only in our local region, but throughout the state. Looking at these trends, there's some really good data that's available from the Alaska Housing Finance Corporation. They had a very helpful November article addressing the housing market trends in Alaska. And basically some of the highlights that they noted in that are that vacancy rates are going down, average rents are increasing, and the increasing number of homes being used as vacation rentals is continuing to rise. One interesting statewide stat that I saw in that report was that in 2015, they had noted that there were 500 vacation rentals counted, and by 2022, that number had increased to nearly 7,500. This is a 15-fold increase. Looking at the Alaska Department of Labor and Workforce Development, this agency also collects regional stats on housing costs and vacancy rates. This data is looking at the borough as a whole, but I think it's still relevant to us in Soldotna. And looking at housing vacancy rates on the Kenai Peninsula Borough, in 2020, that number was 10.6%. In 2021, it had decreased to 7.3%, and in 2022, it is down to 3.5%. Another interesting stat that they have available is looking at total short-term rental units versus total housing units as a whole for the city as compared to the municipality of Anchorage versus the Kenai Peninsula Borough. They're vastly different municipalities. However, if you look in Anchorage, they had about 2,300 short-term rental listings, and on the Kenai Peninsula Borough, they had 2,100. So as a borough, we almost rank even with Anchorage on our number of short-term rentals. However, Anchorage has about 118,000 housing units, while the Kenai Peninsula Borough has about 31,000. So a much higher percentage of our housing units are being used for short-term rentals. Reaching out to stakeholders within our community, I was able to speak to Brandy McGee, who is the executive director for the Kenai Peninsula Housing Initiative. They mentioned that they are seeing fewer housing options than they've seen in the past, with lots of people they work with are very much struggling to find stable long-term housing. One of the interesting metrics that she mentioned to me is that they do keep track of the number of people that they have on wait lists, and they do that breakdown by local community on the peninsula. And one of the categories they had for that are low-income families that are trying to find housing. The wait list in Soldotna has historically averaged about 10 families or less. Currently, their wait list for families looking for low-income housing in the Soldotna area is 30 when I spoke to her last week, so it's significantly higher than normal. I believe that it is important that we take proactive steps to minimize the impacts of these trends locally. And what this ordinance would be doing is really, it's just taking a look at the fact that we're potentially opening up the doors and going to be increasing the number of ADUs that we're putting on the market for rental within the city. So we're basically adding a bunch of potential new housing units within our city. And if we're going to do it, I really think it's important that we do so as a means to ensure that we're basically growing our housing stock that's, serving our residents, not necessarily the people that are flowing through, but the people that live here and call this home. Those are the people I think that we really need to be taking care of. And just to clarify, this is not taking away the ability to do short-term rentals as we have previously had established in the city. So primary dwelling units have always been able to be used for short-term rentals as long as they meet our code for that. Any of those established units continue to be permitted. And again, if you look in Airbnb, like I mentioned, there's a lot of short-term rentals in our city. All of those continue to operate. So we do have those options that are available in the market. It's just, again, if we're going to be adding accessory dwelling units, we're doing so and a means to make sure that they're used for long-term housing for those that live in our community. Although I personally don't feel that this may necessarily fully cover the needs that we have, I believe that this is a good start to ensure that we're doing what we can to, again, protect local housing options and then doing it in a balanced way that it allows, again, a balance between short-term rentals and long-term rentals throughout the city. Again, a lot of information here. I'd be happy to make myself available for any questions when this circles back to council. And thank you for your consideration tonight.
Thank you. Are there any members of the public who wish to speak on this item? For those participating through Zoom, please raise your hand if you would like to comment. App users by pressing the raise your hand button, and phone participants by dialing *9 on your telephone. Please state your name and address for the record, and you'll have 3 minutes.
Leslie Rohr, 533 Pace Street, Soldotna. I serve as the Executive Director of Love Inc. of the Kenai Peninsula, and we are the major providers of permanent housing placement and homeless prevention for the entire Kenai Peninsula Borough. When I left the office tonight, I checked with my housing case manager. She has over 52 open files on her desk for families waiting for housing. When Jordan refers to the KPHI waiting list of 30 families, we have in excess than 80 families who are waiting for housing because none of the people that we have on our list are on their list. So I feel like while people who have ADUs on their property certainly have the right to have them as short-term rentals, but I think encouraging people to provide short-term housing for families in crisis is really important and would make a strong statement for the city of Soldotna. At the shelter that we operate out in Nikiski, we have 22 beds. We've been almost completely full for a year now. We have served over 83 adults, 27 children, and 17 pets. Those 27 children, the oldest one being 13 years old down to newborns. So they're young families that are in need of housing, and there are some of them having to stay at the shelter longer than their 30, 60, 90 days because we're unable to find suitable housing for them. So I thank you, Mr. Chilson, for bringing that forward, and I think it would be a good thing.
Any questions from the council? Thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else in the audience wishing to speak on this item? Okay, I'm looking at Zoom and I see one hand raised. Mr. Cox.
Yes, thank you. I was just going to add a few items as I consider myself somewhat of an expert on our rental units around the area. Is that what I have seen, at least in my units, is since COVID, we have actually had some of the reason for the low vacancy rate, and this is just my experience only, is that I've seen in our rentals that we have sometimes only one person living in a unit that is a 2-bedroom unit often, and it's one person, and that had to do with at one time is we had been given enough money as individuals to say, to allow for people to live in those because the idea was to spread out. There have been several people that have been able to do that since, but I do think that is going to start changing. I have been starting to see more roommating happening, those kinds of ideas, because a lot of those monies are dried up, and we're now getting into more of what I would consider a regular time where there are some assistances, but not specifically toward COVID. I would very much recommend that we limit these units as little as possible. One of the ideas behind these units is they'll probably be small. So we're not going to harm families by renting these units as daily weeklies. So you won't be harming a family by doing that because they would not be the ones renting that to begin with. And so you won't be harming them in those ways. And I just question if we limit those, that if that's the direction that the city should be going and limiting in any way. And so I'm all for not limiting these structures. Thank you.
Are there any questions for Mr. Cox? Seeing none, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, seeing that there's no further people wishing to speak, the item is back before the council. Are there any council comments? Mr. Jolson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think in my report I tend to ramble. So just in summary, I would say that there's not a lot of rental units that are available on the market. That might be changing in the future. What I know is now we don't have a lot. There is a very unique opportunity here coming up that we don't often have with new housing making itself available onto our market. This doesn't happen very often. I am very concerned that there is a very strong national trend of the limited housing units that are available for rentals being rapidly converted throughout the country for short-term rental purposes. I'm sure members of this body are familiar with what's going on in Seward and Homer. This has an economic impact as well. They have trouble finding workers because low-income workers can't find apartments to live in the area and work those starter jobs, and it pushes them out. To the point about families, I don't think that this is a solution for family housing necessarily. I do agree with Assemblyman Cox on that point. I see this as an opportunity for people that are just moving out of their parents' houses, or low-income people that maybe a couple or a single person that just they want to find their first housing unit. They don't have a lot of money and they're just trying to find cheap housing. Just cheap housing that could be a college student going to KPC. There's a lot of need there and a lot of opportunity. And I think that if we don't address this to begin with, it's much easier to be proactive than it is to be reactive. I don't want to see Soldotna fall into the trap of what Homer and Seward are today. This is an opportunity to seize a very unique opportunity that we have here. And like I said, it's not a full solution, but I think it's a great start. That's all I have. Thank you.
Any other comments from the council? Vice Mayor Parker.
Thank you, Mayor Whitney. I was able to read through the minutes from the Soldotna Planning Commission, and I see where the Planning Commission voted to not support this proposed amendment to the ordinance. Through the city manager, can you provide us with more detail on the Planning Commission's comments and thoughts?
Thank you, Vice Mayor Parker. Actually, I'd like to ask Mr. Zarneski, our planning director, to give a report on that.
Thank you. So in looking back at those minutes and listening again to the testimony that was made and the comments that were made during that meeting, I'll briefly run through those specific comments that were made. And the first one was that there aren't that many parcels in general in the rural residential district. And to that end, with so few parcels, why be so restrictive? So again, this resolution or this ordinance would limit ADUs, or I should say ADUs in the rural residential district would be the only one that could have short-term rentals. So that was the concern from one commissioner, that there's relatively few parcels and concerned that that it's too restrictive. The next commissioner reported or stated that by doing this, it removes the option of short-term rentals for future ADU owners or builders. And so here, the concern, as I understood it, was that that we're basically limiting choice within the community. And this commissioner did not feel that we should limit choice when it came to their ability to select the type of unit they wanted to build. The third comment was really just a question about those properties that are zoned rural residential, reflecting on that first comment. And I can share with you what I shared with the commission, that roughly a third is what I stated to the commission. I went back and looked at the numbers. It's actually 29% of the parcels within the city of Soldotna are zoned rural residential. The remainder, 71%, are zoned either single family, two-family, or multifamily. The next comment was regarding size, and it's similar to the comment that Mr. Cox made regarding the type of housing that an ADU would provide, that at 750 square feet, the concern was that we're really only targeting a small portion of the population that needs housing that size, and they weren't sure that that would make that big of a difference in the housing units that are available. The next comment stated that they felt that short-term rentals within the proximity of our downtown would help activate our downtown, help it keep it stay busy, and so for that reason they were supportive of the concept of allowing for more short-term rentals within the ADUs. The next comment dealt with offering short-term rentals to the traveling public. They were supportive of the idea of having options other than hotels. And in closing comments, a couple things that I'll share with you. One commissioner stated that allowing short-term rentals within ADUs will self-regulate and may even help solve the issue of not having enough housing units. Another commissioner stated that, again, it will self-regulate and they don't want to take their options away from people. And then last, short-term rentals for ADUs has a potential to increase revenue for families and for the city. So that's a summary of the comments from the Planning Commission.
Any other questions or comments from the council? Mr. Carey.
I think we always want to be particularly cautious if we're doing I'll say, kind of social engineering in terms of who can live where. Certainly at the Kenai Peninsula Economic Development District Forum in Homer, there was very, very large discussion about not anywhere near the housing necessary, as was mentioned. I'm very aware that we've got, I believe, 5 years of, I think, very extensive growth in terms of, and a lack of workforce. And one of the things in terms of finding workforce is certainly to have housing for people to stay while they're working on something. I was with the meeting of a number of community leaders from all over the peninsula last night, and they were certainly speaking about the difficulty of hiring people and the retention of people because of lack of housing. And so that my concern with this is that it would not provide us the flexibility and options for particularly those people who are coming here for shorter periods of time to work, to build our community, to contribute. And I want to do everything we can, particularly in this next few years, to allow people to come here to help build all the things that the government's agreed to provide, whether it's from the transportation funds from the federal government or the state projects. Certainly, we've passed a very large bond issues for schools, and we've done our own here with the city. And so my concern with this, and the reason I won't support it, is I believe it would put restrictions on local people and how they can use their resources and, again, help provide places for people to stay. And I just think it's a little bit of overreach for government. Thank you.
Any other comments? Mr. Nelson?
I'm not generally in favor of a restriction or an overt restriction, although I am certainly in favor of zoning and how that contributes to planning for a well-designed and well-livable city. I'm not sure if this is going to solve the issue with short-term rentals. I agree there certainly is one, and it's obvious that many people in the traveling public, whether they're traveling professionals or they're on vacations, are utilizing short-term rentals as an alternative to a B&B or to a hotel. But there's no question of what it's done to the housing market. And if we look at Soldotna in general, yes, there's absolutely an argument to be made that the funds that come in are an economic stimulus, and some percentage of those funds certainly do stay in the local area. But probably in the long term, the lack of housing is a bigger issue. And I think if this helps some of that, it's not going to help the whole thing. But if it gets us one step in the right direction, then that's a positive. Even though maybe there is something to be said for the argument of it is restricting a use or something like that. So I'm going to support this. I don't think it's the best tool, but I think it's a reasonable tool to step forward and maybe address one piece of that issue, as Councilmember Chilson addressed. There's other communities in the Kenai Peninsula that have a higher issue with that, and we may be faced with the same thing at some point or some other issues. So I'll support the legislation for those reasons.
Any other comments from the council? Vice Mayor Parker?
Thank you, Mayor Whitney. Based on the comments and the conversation from the Planning Commission meeting, I am very much depend upon the Planning Commission and the work that the Planning Commission does. So I am going to go with the recommendation from the Planning Commission and not support this. As has been said, I don't see that this is going to solve our housing issue. I think one of the things that would solve our housing issue within the city of Soldotna is if we had more land available for housing development, which we don't have. But I don't like seeing the distinction between the zoning districts and allowing what can be short-term versus long-term and precluding you that live in the rural residential area from, or not in the rural residential, you can do both, but in the single member, you can't do a short-term rental. And so I think we would see big pushback from those property owners. So I'm not going to support it. And again, thanks to the Planning Commission for their deliberation and discussion.
Any other comments from the council? Mr. Choson?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. To the comment about the delineation between the different zoning districts, my goal with this is really that by focusing just on the residential core districts, where we're keeping development within our residential districts focused on our residents so that we're not building a bunch of short-term rentals that are used for business purposes and not serving our residents in a residential district. We still have plenty of short-term rentals throughout the city elsewhere that are going to continue to serve those needs throughout the commercial, rural residential, and then again, primary dwellings can continue to be used for short-term rentals in the in the traditional residential districts. So there are plenty of short-term rentals that continue to meet those needs. I do greatly appreciate all the work that our Planning and Zoning Commission put into this. And I feel that if this were not to pass tonight, this is a good starting point for this discussion. I would like this not to fall by the wayside. And my request to staff would be that I would really like to see this issue brought back to the Planning and Zoning Commission, because I think we are going to continue to see trends of housing units being pulled off the market and converted to short-term rentals. And we really do need to be proactive about this because, again, it's much easier to set policy in advance than try to reactively set policy to fix something after it's already broken. So even if this doesn't pass tonight, again, I recognize that this is not a perfect solution. It may not even be a great solution, but it is a step, I think, in the right direction to try to slow the tide of things pulling housing units out of the long-term market and taking that service away from our residents. It's just one tool that we have right now because this is an opportunity that doesn't happen often when we have new housing that's going to potentially be hitting our market. So regardless of how this goes, I really would like to see this discussion carried forward now that we've started it and get our planning zone and commission working on it, because I do greatly appreciate the work they do. They do great work for the city and their opinions do matter. And I would really like to see what they're able to come up with as far as alternative recommendations to address this issue, because it is very much an issue and it's only going to continue to grow.
Can I have a follow-up?
Go ahead, Vice Mayor.
So to the city manager, the definition of short-term and long-term rental?
Thank you, Vice Mayor Parker. So short-term rental would be anything lower than 30 days. So essentially, we define and differentiate between long-term residences as being a rental that's at least month to month. Something of a duration shorter than that is differentiated in our zoning code as being a short-term rental, which is more of a commercial use.
And so if I'm in a single member district, single zoning district, and I wanted to put my house on VRBO, if this were to pass, I would be precluded from doing that for short term.
So I'm going to answer, John, and please correct me. So this is a complicated intersection of two different sections of code. So the council within the recent years had adopted standards related to short-term rentals of all residences in the city. So there's a different chapter of code entirely that sets forth standards for a person who owns a home, instead listing it on one of the short-term rental sites like Airbnb, VRBO. And John, I don't know if you have the code in front of you, but this issue is related but limited in focus to those accessory dwelling units which are subservient, so a second housing type on a parcel, and a decision about whether or not those ADUs could also be used as short-term rentals on a site like Airbnb and VRBO. And I will, for context, add that the city code, the zoning code, at least as long as I've been working here, so since 2008, has had a provision for what it called mother-in-law apartments, but it was even more restrictive than what we have now, because you could not rent those to someone for any amount of time. So the code specifically limited those mother-in-law apartments to only use for personal use for friends and guests, but where no money could be charged. So the code, until the ordinance on which this follows up pretty closely in time, it had been the case that you couldn't even rent them on a month-to-month basis. But John, is there something you can add? Because we did spend a lot of time in the development of the ADU code looking at the intersection between that chapter and the chapter that's separate that regulates the use of short-term rentals more generally.
Yes, thanks. So as the city manager indicated, for our short-term rental code, basically at this point has two sets of standards, one for owner-occupied, one for non-owner-occupied. And it's the non-owner-occupied ones that require more extensive permitting and involvement than just the traditional B&B or the owner-occupied. There is a section in that code that does state that if a short-term rental is developed as an ADU, then you have to follow the ADU code, which was just adopted. And again, the ADU code that was adopted does permit accessory dwelling units in all of our residential districts, single family, two-family, and multifamily and rural residential. They allow one per lot. It can't be more than 750 square feet. And it allows for one dwelling unit on any parcel with an ADU to be used as a short-term rental, provided that one of the units is owner-occupied. So if you were in the single-family district today, or the single-family, two-family district, you could construct an ADU and you could rent it out as a short-term rental, but the owner would have to live in either the ADU or in the permanent, the traditional home. With the adoption of the proposal before you, in the single family, two-family, the ADU would only be allowed for a long-term rental.
And long-term is over 30 days.
Correct.
So I would have to rent it for 31 days. If I rented it for 31 days, it's still a short-term in my opinion, but I would be in compliance with the law if this was to pass.
As our code, as City Manager Queen indicated, our code does state 30 days is short-term and over 30 is long-term, so yes.
Any other comments from the council? I think I'm going to pass the gavel here for a second. I'll make a couple of comments, or at least one comment. I guess one of my concerns on this is that it could possibly dampen the ability of a private homeowner to build an ADU with these kind of restrictions on it. Meaning, why should I invest the money in doing an ADU and I'm restricted on who and how I can rent it? So I'm a little concerned with this. I understand everyone's issue and concerns about affordable housing and housing in general. And I'm a renter. I'm renting long-term on the house. And they were hard to find. It was hard, difficult. So I'm not sure passing this ordinance is going to accomplish anything. It may even, in a way, make it a little bit worse. So that's all I have to say.
Thank you, Mayor Whitney. Passing the gavel back.
Mr. Carey.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. One of the issues when we speak about annexation is a perception, accurate or not, but a perception that if you come into the city, they're going to put a whole lot of rules on you, that you lose some of your freedom decision-making. This would seem to add to that perception. I really hope as much as possible that we don't approve this, which would, in my opinion at least, restrict what people can do with their own property. Thank you.
Any other comments? Ms. Hutchings.
Well, I think that my comment is, I believe that you should listen to your planning and zoning. They go through and they research and they understand what the needs are as well. And I've always felt that that's why you have these boards and commissions, is so that they can give you their expert opinion. So I will be voting against this.
Anything else? We'll call for the vote.
Parker?
No.
Nelson?
Yes.
Hutchings?
No.
Carey?
Nope.
Chilson?
Yes.
Wackler?
No.
You have 2 yes, 4 no.
Ordinance 22-035 fails on a 2-4 vote. And to our new council member, the first vote is always the toughest. Moving on to the next item on the agenda is ordinance 2022-038, increasing estimated revenues and appropriations by $6,701 in the general fund for forfeited property, introduced by the city manager. May I have a motion to enact? Mr. Carey.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I move the adoption of ordinance 2022-038.
May I have a second? Thank you, Ms. Hutchings. A report from the administration.
you, Mayor Whitney. The memo in the packet from Chief Meek outlines the intended use of these funds. This is our normal procedure if there are forfeited funds that we identify a need within the Soldotna Police Department and propose the use of them in that way. And as you can see, he's intending to use them for a variety of community engagement materials and supplies, which is an activity I greatly support. And that concludes my report. I'm sure he'd be happy to and available to answer questions if there are any. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any members of the public who wish to speak on this item? For those participating through Zoom, please raise your hand if you would like to comment. App users by pressing the raise your hand button, and phone participants by dialing *9 on your telephone. Is there anyone here in the audience wishing to speak on ordinance 2022-038? Seeing none, I'll look at Zoom, and I see no hands raised there. Having no one wishing to speak, the item is back before the council. Are there any council comments? Mr. Nelson.
And just a request of administration or the chief here, maybe in the future. I know there's some ideas in here, but I'd certainly be interested in more detail once some of these activities have been done. So maybe a memo or report in the future would be appreciated. Thanks.
Anything else? Any other comments? Seeing none, we'll call for the vote.
Hutchings,
Yes.
Nelson,
Yes.
Carey,
Yes.
Chilson,
Yes.
Wackler,
Yes.
Parker.
Yes.
You have 6 yes votes.
Ordinance 2022-038 passes on a 6-0 vote. Moving on to the next agenda item, new business. That would be resolution 2023-003, adding a temporary part-time records project assistant position, range 15, and amending the fiscal year 23 authorized staffing table to reflect the change, introduced by the city clerk. May I have a motion to adopt?
And I'll move to adopt resolution 2023-3.
Thank you, Mr. Nelson. May I have a second? Thank you, Ms. Hutchings. A report from the clerk.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, council members. So, as is typically the case, what I've noticed so far and what I experienced with BREC is that records have been put on the back burner. And we also implemented a new system prior to Ms. Sainer exiting, and the old records did not get fully put into the new system. And we also have not accomplished a training program for city users of the new system. There's a need to complete the file index transition and to digitally archive older vital records. There's also some other issues that need to be dealt with that are not as high on the priority list. And I think we have a really unique opportunity here, and that is to bring BREC back as a subject matter expert, which she has already agreed to, if I was able to get this past you guys, to come back for a period of potentially up to 6 months, but starting with this fiscal year for around 12 to 18 hours a week, to bring our records to a place where administrative assistants and Justin and I can keep them in a perfect condition moving forward. So I respectfully request your adoption of this piece of legislation.
Thank you. Are there any members of the public who wish to speak on this item? For those participating through Zoom, please raise your hand if you would like to comment. App users by pressing the raise your hand button, and phone participants by dialing *9 on your telephone. Anyone here in the audience wishing to speak on resolution 2023-003? Seeing none, looking at Zoom, I see no hands raised. Having no one wishing to speak, the item is back before the council. Are there any council comments? Seeing none, we'll call for the vote.
Chilson?
Yes.
Parker?
Yes.
Hutchings?
Yes.
Wackler?
Yes.
Nelson?
Yes.
Carey?
Yes.
You have 6 yes votes.
Resolution 2023-003 passes on a 6-0 vote. Moving on to the next agenda item, it's Resolution 2023-004, identifying City of Soldotna legislative priorities for the first regular session of the 33rd Legislature of the State of Alaska beginning January 17th, 2023, introduced by the city manager. May I have a motion to adopt?
So move.
Thank you, Vice Mayor Parker. May I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Nelson. Report from the administration.
Thank you, Mayor Whitney. Mr. Cornelis and I had a conversation with Diane Bloomer, who's the lobbyist on behalf of the city's interest in Juneau, and discussed a strategy for the upcoming session. In consultation with her, we determined that it might be advantageous for the council to identify 4 capital projects that were deemed priority and would be the focus of our outreach and engagement in Juneau, and trying to pick 2 that were maybe larger asks and 2 that were smaller, under $1 million, for example, as well as having the council consider and identify priorities that might be non-capital project funding related. And so this legislation is prepared. Our recommendation, as you can see, are the 4 projects we've identified as matching funding for the Soldotna Fieldhouse, funding potentially for the construction of the sports center's replacement of the conference rooms. That design work is funded in the current fiscal year and will be starting soon. Citywide streets preventative maintenance, that's a project from our 5-year capital plan that would give us some flexibility to address some street issues. And then the 4th project, as I noted, was not in the 5-year capital plan, but recently one that the chief and I discussed and I'm supportive of, and that would be really modernizing our camera and technology and some of our tools within the Soldotna Police Department. So we, as the administrative level, feel that these 4 are reasonable requests and appropriate to call out and highlight in our communications with legislators, the governor and his team. And we would anticipate, if adopted, generating a front and back, a 1-page laydown that would focus on these 4 projects in a bit more detail for very busy legislators who may not have time or may be getting a lot of visits from communities expressing their priorities and their community needs. A 1-pager with 4 projects we think will be a more effective communication tool. Since the packet was prepared, we did receive the packet of resolutions that were adopted at the Alaska Municipal League Conference in December, and so those were communicated to you after the packet was shared as a laydown item. The council may wish to call out specific resolutions of those, or we could reference them generally in our communications, but I wanted to make sure that you had that information now that it's available. The other non-capital priorities we recommended were continued partnerships, really working well with different agencies on whether it's renewal of our APDES permit or moving forward with administering federal grant funds, partnering with DOT. We called both of those out. And I included 2 more generic priorities. And really what I was trying to address there is the fact that bills will come out. We've already seen the first batch of pre-filed bills. There will be more. And this language is not intended to provide support or opposition of bills, but generally to clarify that it is the council's interest, if you would want us to do this, to be commenting on potential impacts of legislation as it comes, because we might be in a position where we need to move quickly, and just giving a general sense of, you know, if there are bills that impact the city financially or impact our local authority to make decisions here at the local level, that there would be interest in having us comment on those impacts as bills are introduced. Mr. Cornelis or I would be happy to answer questions if there are. As I also mentioned in the memo, we would still be anticipating loading the entire 5-year capital plan into CAPSIS, which is the system that legislators use, and this is something that's done annually. Mr. Cornelis does this through his department. We did still feel like there would be benefit, and in part it shows continuity of our priorities, that the city's priorities don't drop off or change from year to year, but really the intent of this resolution as it's drafted would be to focus us on 4 projects if the council concurs with that recommendation. And that concludes my report. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any members of the public who wish to speak on this item? For those participating through Zoom, please raise your hand if you would like to comment. App users by pressing the raise your hand button, and phone participants by dialing *9 on your telephone. Anyone here in the audience wishing to speak on this resolution 2023-004? Seeing no one, I'm looking at Zoom and I see no hands raised there. Having no one wishing to speak, the item is back before the council. Are there any council comments? Mr. Carey.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I support all of them, and I particularly want to say to the chief, I very much appreciate the idea of cameras. Very proactive. It helps both sides. Sometimes there's a perception that it's more for one for the other. No, it protects everybody, and that's what we should always be looking for in being proactive. Thank you, sir, for pushing that, and I hope we'll approve all of those.
Any other comments? I have one quick one. Who will this resolution be sent to?
Thank you, Mayor Whitney. We didn't include a section that would direct that this document itself be communicated to any particular legislator, but we would develop communication materials based on this priority list that would go. So, but that's certainly something we could include if there was interest.
It's going to go to the legislature and the governor's office. Is that the plan?
Yes, we would communicate broadly through, in coordination with our lobbyist, all of these priorities. Yeah.
Thank you. Any other comments? Seeing none, we'll call for the vote.
Carey,
Yes?
Chilson,
Yes.
Parker,
Yes.
Hutchings,
Yes.
Wackler,
Yes.
Nelson.
Yes.
You have 6 yes votes.
Resolution 2023-004 passes on a 6-0 vote. Moving on to the next agenda item, mayor and council reports. Mayor's report is, I would request that the city administration find time to have our new council member a tour of the city facilities and different departments and see what goes on in the city and how things are operated. And along with that, I guess it will come from the city clerk's office, is a computer for her. Yep. Okay. So, like I said, you're going to be busy over the next few days, 30 days at least. One other item, February, the AML conference in Juneau. If anyone is interested in attending, to please make note of that date. I'm not sure what the I think it's 21st through the 23rd or something like that. So if you could get that information to our new council member. Next item, council reports and boards and commissions. There are none this evening. City manager's report.
Thank you, Mayor Whitney. First, I wanted to again thank our members of the Soldotna Police Department. We recently had Law Enforcement Appreciation Week, and I want to recognize Chief Meek and his team, the dedicated men and women of that department. We heard several times today how much the members of the public recognize the safety as being one of the key attributes of our community, and I want to thank our men and women in the department for keeping that the case. So thanks, Chief. I will be presenting you with the year-end department reports at your next meeting. So our department heads have been preparing their year-end review, which is always consolidated into a document that it's a great resource and great thing for us to share with you and the community. So you can expect that as part of the packet for the January 25th meeting. Looking just one step ahead beyond that, on February 8th, I will coordinate with the mayor and the clerk, and it's my intention to, at that point, have finalized and be ready to present to you our recommended strategies and proposals related to recruitment and retention. So we've been, as you know, we've been doing quite a bit of work, very thorough. Started out with 40 ideas. It's now down to 9 that I think have significant merit. And I'll present some information as part of a work session about workforce and what is the significant change we've seen that's occurring that's causing us to try and attack hiring and retaining employees with some new tools and strategies. So if February 8th is a date that works for a work session, that's my intent to have that information prepared for you for consideration at that date. And I look forward to doing the onboarding with our new councilwoman Wackler. I almost said Heath because we have another KCHS grad joining our ranks, and we've had good success, I think, with those folks on the council and at the staff level. So welcome, Ms. Heath. Look forward to brief, it may be short, but I look forward to working with you over the next month or so. And that concludes my report.
Thank you. Any comments for the city manager? Okay, moving on to the next item on the agenda is public comments. Members of the public will have 3 minutes to comment. Is there anyone from the public who wishes to comment? For those participating through Zoom, please raise your hand if you would like to comment. App users by pressing the raise your hand button, and phone participants by dialing *9 on your telephone. Anyone here in the audience wishing to speak on? Saying none, I'm looking at Zoom and I see no hands raised there. So we'll move on to the next item on the agenda, council comments. Ms. Hutchings.
Well, I would like to welcome Chera, and I really look forward to working with her. I've worked with her on 100 Women Who Care, and she does seem to have a lot of energy. So I'm excited about that, and young blood is always great. So welcome.
Mr. Nelson.
And welcome as well, Chair. Appreciate that. Hopefully good to meet you and work with you. And I just wanted to point out, I'm going to talk about snow, and I'm sorry, but I just wanted to recognize, I noticed my street and many others have been widened over the past week or two, and I see dump trucks still full of snow going everywhere. So I want to thank those folks. Everybody can complain about streets and roads, but I see improvement. So I want to thank the folks of the city that do that, and have a good night.
Mr. Chilson.
Also, welcome aboard, Chera. It's going to be exciting to work with you moving forward. And then also, just thanks to staff and our consultants today for a very productive work session on the riverfront development. I thought that was very informative, and I'm really looking forward to attending the community event tomorrow night and seeing what feedback we get from that.
Vice Mayor Parker.
Thank you, Mayor Whitney. As Councilman Nelson mentioned, the work that the Roads Department has done has been exemplary, and they are to be commended. I'm glad to see we're going to hopefully appropriate more money because there could be more snow, but also to see the sidewalks cleared. Maybe if we say there might be and we do this, then it won't happen. But, based on everything we read about some of the other communities in our state, while it took time, but there was a lot of snow, the Street Road Department has done just a great job, and Scotty and his crew should get a special dinner or something. And I also want to welcome Councilmember Wackler, and we've engaged in the past, and I look forward to working with you in the next few months.
Mr. Carey.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. It speaks very well for the city of Soldotna that we had 4 excellent people apply to be on this council. I was very pleased. As always, it can be difficult to make a choice, but it is very nice when you know that whoever is chosen, it is going to be a good person on our council. Saying that, I just want to ask the rest of the council to please speak with the new council person. She's stuck sitting next to me, okay? It's not her fault, okay? She didn't have a choice. It's, again, these letters in order. And, again, help keep her on the straight and narrow as compared to what I will encourage her to do in terms of voting. Exactly, don't listen to me. The work session we had before the meeting was wonderful. It's exactly the type of things that I enjoy doing because it allows us to talk about vision and where we're going and the future, bringing in people that are experts on it, but again, allowing us to get involved. And the process that at least was outlined is going to be an ongoing one. And there's a lot of good options to be looking at. And I greatly appreciate the work that's being done. And I'll do this sort of in advance because I know everyone else is going to want to be doing it soon. I greatly appreciate the work that our city manager's done. And again, getting to work with her, again, a ways back when she first arrived here at the city and seeing the growth and the development. And that reflects the growth and development that this city has had under her leadership in all the different roles she's done. And so I greatly appreciate who you are and what you have done. And I look forward to to the very difficult process. I did, ma'am, when you first started the discussion here a few moments ago in terms of, and you said there are 40, and what came to my mind is there's 40 applicants. Oh, my goodness. But again, and you said the 40 went down to 9. I thought, oh, my God, there's 9 applicants. But anyway, I just thank you for what you've done.
Ms. Wackler.
I'd like to start with saying thank you for giving me the opportunity to sit here for the next few months and learn a lot. I know I have a big task ahead of me, learning how all this works in actuality, and I look forward to it. So, patience with me, please. Thank you.
Moving on to the next agenda item is meeting announcements. I'll go with a couple others that aren't on the list here, but tomorrow night at the Sports Center will be the Riverfront Development Open House. I believe that starts at 6 p.m. till 7:30. So anyone interested in the Riverfront Development Project should be there. The next thing, there will be some other special meetings coming up for the council. I believe tentatively there could be one on January the 31st. 30th, excuse me, January 30th. And that'll be coming out officially here shortly. Otherwise, January the 16th, Library Advisory Board meeting, 5:15 p.m. January 20th, special city council meeting, 5 p.m. January 24th, 2023, Parks and Recreation Advisory Board meeting, 5:30 p.m. And January 25th, 2023 is a city council meeting at 6 p.m. Having nothing else on the agenda.
Mr. Mayor?
Go ahead, Mr.
I'm sorry, but just because of that, I love the computers and they do all kinds of wonderful things and the iPhones and that. But when I went to put in my library advisory board meeting for January 16th and it came up right away and then put it on my on the calendar, it said canceled. Is there? Okay, so somewhere there's just a fluke here. Thank you very much. I'm sorry to interrupt you, but mine said they'd be canceled.
You might need a new telephone.
No. Thank you.
Okay, having nothing further on the agenda, the meeting is adjourned.